When are you happy? When are you fulfilled? When would you say that you are content with life, or even blissful? Think about that for a moment. Do you know yourself well enough to know the answer to that question? We all have mistaken beliefs, and sometimes they impact how we are or how we live. Sometimes we want to be the center of everything, and we want everyone to think about us and serve us and admire us. It's true. That may even be what we want and what we hope for. But let me ask you this: when you have gotten what you wanted, were you really fulfilled in the way that you expected? What if your wants conflict with other people's wants? What happens then? Does battling for your rights bring you happiness when you win and they lose? Does maneuvering and manipulating to have your way make you happy, bring fulfillment? Sit on that for a moment. I've had a general feeling of happiness all week because I get to come here to work and the yard is cleaned up. It's a simple thing. But I look around, sometimes I get up and go look out the window, go, yeah, it looks nice out there. Glass is clean in the windows, the weeds are moved, trees are cut down, and cars in the parking lot are clean, although. And it was a joy to be of service with other people, helping towards an end together. And I think when we do things like that, we get some idea of what the Lord teaches in His Word when He says to us, He says about Himself initially, I've come to be not to be served, but to serve. And He also said, whoever wants to be first among you, let him be your servant. And that greatness is in serving. And He also rebuked the Pharisees who would come and look for the best places in the synagogue so they could be up front and people could see them and see that they were very religious and important. Or they wanted the best places in the marketplace as well. Or they wanted to do their charitable deeds before other people so that other people could see how wonderful they were. Oh, look what the good thing that they're doing. And there was this practice that they had of wearing these things called phylacteries, which was, remember the Lord said, keep the word on your forehead, on your wrist. And so they made these little boxes with scripture in them, and the Pharisees would enlarge their boxes so they'd be, bigger. So people would go, oh, they're really religious because they have these big boxes. It's almost like they're carrying around the whole scripture on their foreheads. That was supposed to make them seem important. And then the disciples who would argue about which of them would be the greatest, and the Lord rebuking them for that. Like, it's not about being the greatest. It's about being of service. The writings say this: we are not born for our own sake, but for the sake of others. So we go through this world trying to learn how to shun our ego, our pride, arrogance, or haughtiness. And it's a general theme of the Lord's Word. I think we know that. And it's not a surprise for me to say that to you, that that's kind of a theme that the Lord brings out in the Word. And He says the enemies that we will have will be those of our own household. They're not out there, so don't look out there for the people that are causing your problems. The Lord says the enemies will be those of your own household, our own negative attitudes, our own thoughts, our own problems, our own anger and frustration, our own self-centeredness. These are the things that are our enemies that we have to deal with. So turning to the story of the Word, these stories are given, and we talked about Daniel chapter 1 today, because they are timeless stories about our inner life, what's going on inside of us in our world. So all the characters, all the different places picture something within us. That's why they're there. So today there's Babylon. You heard that name. And Babel, you hear about it in the Old Testament earlier, the Tower of Babel, the same word. And Jerusalem, from which the people were taken captive. And then there's the king in the story, King Nebuchadnezzar. And there's Daniel and his companions. And there's the food that he wants them to eat, the king's delicacies, the food and the wine. And there's the diet that they chose instead of veggies and water. So those are kind of the characters, the things happening in the story that I want to talk about. But setting the scene a little bit, Nebuchadnezzar was king of Babylon, and he laid siege to Jerusalem, and he basically destroyed it and took all of the holy things. Remember all the things that they created or they built at the Lord's instructions to serve the Lord in initially the tabernacle and the temple. And he took them away and just used them for his own pleasure, for himself. He didn't think about these holy things that were used to offer incense, for example. Just use them for dinner on an average night, whatever it is that they would do. So he used it for his own purposes, because he's king. And then he wanted to bring people, and he goes out to say, the best looking and the smartest, just to be, let's get the best people to come, and we'll train them up so they can serve me as well. And some of those who are taken are Daniel and his companions. And they're brought this food that the king wants them to eat, his delicacies. He thought they'd probably be thrilled by that. But he said, no, I don't want to eat those things. Can we just have vegetables and water for 10 days? And if we look okay after that, can we keep on that diet? And there's a little bit of pushback from the servant because he was worried he was going to get executed by the king, not filling out his order. They said, okay, you can do that. So they eat it, and after 10 days, they look great. They look better than everybody else. So what's the story about? The story is about love of dominion and ego. Babylon, the city of Babylon, or Babylon itself, pictures love of dominion, love of ruling, love of controlling. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, pictures our ego, or proprium, as the writings call it. And Jerusalem, where they used to be and where they've been taken from, is like the Lord's church, or heaven, that heavenly place within us. And Daniel is that part of us that can be reformed. Here's what the writings say specifically. It says, those who are being reformed by means of truths from the word and by means of temptations are meant by Daniel. And that makes sense because Daniel and his companions are tempted a lot in these stories. There's a lot of conflict in the stories. In the king's food that they were offered pictures the selfish delights that we might experience from self-love and controlling other people. Because we wouldn't do it if it didn't feel good, right? If there wasn't something in it for us. But the vegetables and the water pictured doctrine and truth from the word. So the story starts to make some sense. Like, okay, I can see what's going on there. So they're taken away from a good place, and this can happen to us, by selfishness and pride, and held captive by our own ego. But there's a part of us that can still rise up and stand up for what we know to be right. Remember where we came from. Remember what our heritage is. And not be seduced by those selfish delights, but live by the Lord's word and from teachings from it. And the results are that we are happier people. In the story, their faces are shinier and they're more full, they're more healthy. Now, we all struggle with this issue to some degree. And maybe you won't admit that, or maybe you don't know that, but that's what we love. We like to control. Maybe it's not other people. Maybe we like to control situations and outcomes. We want things to happen our way, right? We do, because we think we have it right. So why shouldn't it turn out the way that we believe? And we want people to do what we say and these sorts of things. And it can be subtle. It can be very subtle. But it's a battle we face. Who will rule in me? Is it the Babylonian king, love of dominion and ego, or is it going to be the Lord our God? Love of self versus love to the Lord and love to our neighbor. That's the battle that's going on. And it's illustrated by Daniel and his companions. So the temptation is, are we going to give in and lower our standards and have that instead of that? And now you'll go run off and become vegetarians, and that's fine, but that's not what the point of the story is. But there is something that there are truths that are more valuable to us, that actually change our life for the better, that make us happy, that make us fulfilled. And there's information that's not that useful, that doesn't serve us. There's junk food and there's junk stuff we take in. So we can think of Babylon as the land of the love of dominion, and King Nebuchadnezzar as our ego and proprium, or selfhood. Here's a passage from the writings that says, the selfish ego consists in loving ourselves more than God and the world more than heaven, and in making our neighbor of no account, respectively to ourselves. Thus it is the love of self and of the world. Now, there's a healthy way to love yourself, and there's a healthy way to love things of the world, but when they are the most important, that's when we are in trouble. So let's look at some of the symptoms. So I'm going to read to you something from True Christianity, paragraph 400, which talks about what this looks like. And you might just say, oh, that's not me, that's too extreme. But think about it. It's, like I said, it's subtle. And you may not necessarily connect with this as, oh, I'm totally that way. But how does it find its way in? So there's quite a lot of here that are, and try not just think of other people who you know who fit this description, because that's the easier thing to do. The first thing is wishing oneself alone well and no others except for one's own sake. So they can do fine if it supports me, but otherwise no. Doing good to others solely for the sake of one's own reputation, honor, and glory. Asking the question, why should I do this? What will I get out of it? That one comes up pretty subtly. We only love ourselves and what's our own. That includes our children, our grandchildren, which is good to love them, don't get me wrong there, but only loving those who are connected to us. Give regard only to oneself and one's own people. Does good only for show, and if one does it for one's neighbor's sake, it is to win their favor. So we do it so you will see how great we are. Talked about children already. We love those who praise and honor and respect us. Other people who don't are regarded, I like the wording on this, hardly more than ghosts. It's like they don't matter. If they don't respect me, they're not supportive of me, doesn't matter. Treats neighbor as an enemy if the neighbor does not take his part, supporting him, revering him, and respecting him. And this is a worse state, I think, described it. Hates the neighbor and persecutes them, more still if on this account he burns to get his revenge on him and longs for his ruin. Okay, so that's a little extreme. And so is this one. Wants to rule over the whole world, even heaven, in fact, God himself. Is of service to others only for the sake of having services done to self, of being honored and given power. And finally, seeks high rank, not so much to be able to do good, but so as to hold a leading position and to be highly honored, and so fulfill our heart's desire. So I want to be important so I can be considered important, not so I can actually help people. It's about how you see me, not what I can do with that position. So it's simple. It's our own good versus what would the Lord want? What would be of service to others? Good attitude is all life is from the Lord. The Lord rules. Bad attitude is all life is from myself. I rule. Now Babylon, Babel, comes up all over the word. It's beginning, middle, and end. And here's a couple examples of that. We heard about the story of Babylon. That's one example. The other is the Tower of Babel. And you just hear it in the words, let us make a name for ourselves. Let's build a tower that reaches up into heaven. I mean, it's just spelled out right there. And they try to figure, from our own cunning, our own ingenuity, we can figure things out. We don't need the Lord. We don't need any of that stuff. We can do it ourselves. We can make it, I'll just build myself a tower and get to heaven that way. Forget about this path of goodness. And what they left was, the one language that they all had was the language of love and charity. That's what the writings talk about. That's what bounded them together, that created that bond, was when we love each other and we act in charity, we are one. But when we start to think about ourselves only, that divides us, and they became confused. Their languages were divided. So the language of unification is love. The language of diversity is selfishness. I mean that diversity in the negative sense there, not variety. And then there's the story in the book of Revelation about there's a picture of a harlot on a scarlet beast riding this powerful beast, and on her forehead is written, Babylon the Great. It's talking about the love of control that we are drawn by, that seduces us. So it shows up consistently, the beginning, middle, and the end, and all over. So it's a problem throughout our lives. And what does it look like for us? Well, we want our way. That's a simple way to think of it. I want it to go my way, right? Wanting to be right. And you want to prove that you're right, and you want others to admit that you're right. I should use words. I want to admit that I'm right. I want you to know that I'm right. These sorts of things. We get angry when we don't get what we want, or we don't get treated the way we feel we deserve to be treated. There's a power struggle in the relationship. Ever have someone ask you this question, who wears the pants in your family? I find that to be a very bad question, like a wrong question, because it's implying that somebody has control and runs the show, so to speak. Nothing kills a relationship more than someone having power and the other person not. Someone having dominion and the other person being servant. We're talking about those sorts of relationships. So don't ask that question. There shouldn't be anybody ruling. People should be working together as a couple and balanced. Maybe you don't want to contribute to the good of the home. You do this and you do that, and I will do my thing. I'll relax. Could you get that off the floor as we're sitting on the couch? Could you bring me my slippers and my newspaper and these sorts of things? Or playing dead when the baby cries at night. Guilty as charged. Not how can I be served, but how can I serve is the question we ask. Look around and see what can I do to contribute. Do we have rage when children don't obey us? Because it's not really about their healthy development. It's about they need to obey me because my ego and my pride are involved. And don't do anything unless it serves us in some way. What am I going to get from this? Like, what's the benefit to me? So the king wants Daniel and his friends to eat his food. All those things I mentioned, there's an enticing side to that. I mean, we kind of think, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we had enough money to hire servants or people to work for us or whatever the right terminology would be. Someone to take care of everything so I can relax and they'll do what I want them to do. It's very strange. We're son's in a marimba band, and one of the things that we do as parents is we're just supposed to stand there and watch while they set up everything and carry everything. And it's just, I was talking to another parent about it yesterday. It's like, it feels so weird. It's like, just supposed to stand there while they carry everything and set everything up. It's just, there's something that doesn't feel right about not helping out. So there are delights involved, but let's not get seduced by them. Don't buy into that culture. Remember who you are and what you want for yourself. I'm going to eat this way. I'm not going to eat the king's food. And recognize that to some degree, like Daniel and his companions they're captive in Babylon, at least now anyway, that to some degree we're held captive by this love of dominion. The writings say it's one of the ruling loves of hell that we fight with. And it's subtle. And we fight with it throughout our lives. But our good ego is pictured by Daniel. And his name, which I think helps, is God is my judge. That's what his name means. Now, of course, the king changes all their names. Like, you can't have all those names that talk about serving God. Like, Hananiah means God is gracious. Mishael means who is like God. And Azariah means God helps us. And Nebuchadnezzar changes all their names to God, names that relate to some idol that he worships. So, it's like our ego wants to convince us that it's all good. And I think Belteshazzar specifically means protect my power as king. So he's trying to say, Daniel, your job is to protect my power as the king. Daniel doesn't like that. So how do we not buy into the lifestyle pictured by this? What's your true identity as a person? What do you want for yourself? Are you a spiritual person who wants to follow the Lord, that wants to do the right thing? Who are you really, and what do you stand for? The vegetables and the water in the story picture the doctrines and truths from the Word that show us what is right and how to live that way. So ask ourselves literally, what do I ingest? What's my diet And you can think about it physically if you want to, but what's my diet in terms of what do I read, what do I watch, what do I listen to? Do we have filters on our internet so we don't have all this stuff coming at us that's horrible pollution? Do we do anything about that? Do we make choices about what we watch, what we read, what we partake in? We let our kids just do what they want. Oh, it doesn't matter. I can't control it anyway. Well, you can do stuff. You can do stuff. We can do things that help. But what are our choices around that? So the takeaway seems pretty obvious from the story. If we listen to the Lord and His Word, instead of our selfish impulses, we will be happier. We will feel more alive. And it's not always easy to make that choice. So we can try making changes in our outer life. So that's why I mentioned in this campaign, there's actually a group of people that have called this thing called the Daniel Plan, where they do 40 days of changing their health, and they study the story because of this whole story about vegetables and water versus the king's delicacies. So I invite you, and I don't know if you've thought about this or not, but to make a health change in your own life, whatever that is, because I think when we do something externally like that, it gives us the ability to go, oh, I actually can change stuff. I can make a different decision. I can choose vegetables and water versus donuts and Skittles, whatever it is. I'm choosing to make sure that I have a fruit or a vegetable at every meal. That's my plan. You can have a different plan, I don't care that, or you can do nothing. But I would invite you to try something. I was reading an article that said 95% of diets don't work. What works is when we change our lifestyle, we change the way we live. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. So that's the backstory. Yeah, so you might be the 5%. I don't know. There's no evidence to tell us. The point being, it's not a lot. So how many of us have had diets and we tried it and we tried the next one and we tried the next one and we tried the next one, and what changes is lifestyle changes. So I give you my example, do whatever you like. You don't have to do it. But I think when we can show ourselves that we have the ability to make these changes, it helps to reinforce the inner changes. That, oh yeah, I can choose a different way of seeing things, a different way of behaving. One of the things these stories over the next couple of weeks illustrate is that even though Daniel is held captive and his friends, and dangerous things are happening to them, they are at peace. You'll notice that in these stories. They're calm. It's all going to be fine. They're in a fiery furnace in a den of lions. It's no problem. It may be a problem for us, but it wasn't a problem for them because their trust in the Lord. So these stories illustrate that we are going to go through difficult times as we try to do the right thing, but there are ways to get through them. So love over ego challenges us to remember what matters most. Remember the destructive power of the ego and selfishness, and the humility and joy and peace that comes when we trust in the Lord instead. So that's what we'll be talking about over the next couple of weeks, and wish you success in trying to take these lessons to heart and try to work on them. Amen.